mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about the new entry into the MCU that we have all been waiting for quite some time, Spider-Man No Way Home. There's going to be a spoiler-filled review because, I mean, if I didn't talk spoilers in this one, it'd be about a 45-second video. But before I get into it, let me start by reiterating something that I mentioned, I think, at the onset of my Hawkeye coverage, that this is going to be my last Marvel review for the time being. Well, not my last Marvel review. Wednesday's Hawkeye finale will be my last one, but my last MCU film review, at least for the time being. These videos take a lot of time and effort to compose and post, and the Marvel stuff just does not do good numbers for me. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. So, if a time comes where they actually do numbers that are even respectable to the point where it's worth doing it, because I'm passionate about watching this stuff, I'll resume doing it. But as of right now, my plan is for the Hawkeye finale on Wednesday to be the last Marvel property that I review on this channel. But all that shit out of the way, I don't know where to start, man. So I wasn't able to take notes because I was in a movie theater, so I kind of had to put stuff off the top of my head into my notes that I use for when I record videos. So, if there's something that I don't mention or whatever that you want to talk about in the comments, feel free. But I really don't even know where to begin. Okay, so I'll talk about the kind of central premise of the movie. Then I'm going to talk about how it works and why it works. So this one jumps right into it. It picks right back up where Far From Home left off, with the reveal of Peter's identity to the public, as well as a setup, oh man, what's the fucking word? Framed, when you get framed, yeah. And he's framed for Mysterio's death by Mysterio at the end of that film. And this picks up literally right at that moment, because of the court of public opinion bringing Peter down. It starts to affect the lives of those around him. Him and MJ and Ned can't get into MIT solely based off of his now poor reputation. So he goes to Doctor Strange to ask Doctor Strange to make everybody forget that he's Spider-Man. And during the course of this spell, Peter asks for too many revisions to who will remember and who won't. And because of so many revisions, it messes up the spell. And the spell actually has the opposite effect and brings everybody who knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man into this universe. And then the central premise essentially is how to get them home safely, without them killing him as well. So that's a general premise of the film. But in reality, it is like a fanboy's wet dream. It is like the Mona Lisa of fan service. But even aside from that, this film does a lot of great stuff that really works. And it relies on it doesn't entirely rely on you having seen all of the other Spider-Man films, but it's really hard for me to say you will derive as much enjoyment from it as you would if you had seen all of the other Spider-Man films. But I'm definitely not going to tell you to go back and watch all 5 of them. But when I say all 5 of them, I mean the 3 Tobey Maguire ones and the 2 Andrew Garfield ones. You could still like this film, but you'll like it about 1/10 as much as you could have if you had seen all those other things. But before we even get into all the cool fan servicey kind of nostalgic kind of things that happen here, which this thing's dripping in it. We're living in a nostalgia phase right now, and there is a tendency to kind of turn your nose up at it. But this is one of those situations where not only is it done well, but it's almost like, how they say too much of a good thing is not a good thing. In this case, it too much of a good thing made it a great thing. But I want to start with a couple of things that I thought this film did really well aside from that. One of my favorite things, they took poorly utilized villains from the other films and made them entertaining or interesting in this one. And they gave the proper amount of time to the proper ones. Like, they didn't give Lizard a ton of screen time. They didn't give Sandman a ton of screen time. And they did the smart thing and they gave a lot of screen time to the two best villains, Goblin and Doc Ock, and one of the better actors, Jamie Foxx. And the cool thing about that is you can do that when you don't have to build up their backstories and show everyone who they are, where they came from, etc. So when you look at Spider-Man 3, the Tobey Maguire version, we looked at that as like, okay, this has a little bit too many villains in it. How do you really build those people up to where you start them off as normal people and you make them into Spider-Man villains and then they cause a problem, and you do that however many times over, all within the span of one film. And Amazing Spider-Man 2 did the same thing. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So we would be inclined to look at this and go, wow, there's a whole lot of villains in this. But you don't have any of that set up. Like, we already know who these people are. We've already spent a movie with them. So you can just throw them in here. It's the same way they made the Avengers Infinity War Endgame work, is that they didn't have to do any of that building. They just threw you right into it because you already know everybody. And that helped make it so that they could also kind of like fine tune these people and make them a little bit more interesting. So if you looked at, you might look at, say, Electro in Amazing Spider-Man and think, oh man, Jamie Foxx kind of fucked that role up. They looked at it like, okay, we can bring in Jamie Foxx as Electro, but we can make him like a little bit more entertaining, a little bit more interesting, and they found a way to do that. And I love how Marvel has this tendency of not just making decisions that feel like fanboy type shit, like fan service. They feel that way, but they also find a way to make those things work in a different way. So like what I mean by that is, one of the other things that I liked about this film was, wait, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, yep, I didn't. So the other thing that I like about this film that falls into what I was just saying is they managed to somehow do like the slickest reset in like MCU history, or in anything history, honestly. The way this film ends with essentially Peter deciding that he wants to actually go through with the original spell, which was to make everybody forget that he was Spider-Man. Or actually, no, to make everybody forget that Peter Parker even exists, so that no one needs to come to this dimension to find him. It allows them to essentially put Spider-Man back to square one. He doesn't. Well, none of the Avengers would know him. His family's gone. His friends don't know who he is. No one's at risk. His identity is safe. He made himself a slick classic era style, just really nice, vibrant costume. Like, he can kind of just go about his life and just do Spider-Man shit on like a low level kind of way. And that makes it so that if Marvel also wants to, continue to make Spider-Man films, this fourth film, they could do whatever they wanted. Like, they don't have to factor in, okay, well, we already did this, we already did that, so we got to bring in this. Like, they could do whatever they imagine. And if you had issues with a lot of the aspects of the Spider-Man lore that haven't been present in the MCU version, like the Uncle Ben stuff, they gave you the Uncle Ben kind of thing, but with Aunt May. They can now incorporate some of those things in there. Like, maybe if you're a Gwen Stacy person, maybe they can bring a Gwen Stacy in, and you don't not have Zendaya in it, but like maybe you can bring Gwen Stacy in and do something different. So like the fact that they were able to simultaneously take the ending and say, this is how we're gonna wrap up this film. This is how we're gonna solve the ultimate problem here. This is also gives us the ability to do whatever we want down the road. So they're really good at kind of like multi-purposing certain cool things, and they did that here. And I thought it was really smart when I was reflecting on it on the ride home. And they also even teased the possibility in the mid-credit of bringing in Tom Hardy's Venom as a future villain as well. Speaking of which, that scene also has a character from Ted Lasso, so that was pretty cool. I saw some interesting comparisons to Avengers Endgame with this film prior to seeing it. And I'm not, I didn't think at the time of whether or not that'd be an issue or not, because you kind of tend to look at it as like, okay, is it as good as Avengers Endgame? But I looked at it more like Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, I look at them kind of collectively as like the third Avengers movie, but those movies worked because of kind of what I said about the villains for this one. You didn't have to do any of that backstory setup. You could just get right into it. And we already had the backstory over 10 years worth of films. And that's why it was one of the most successful undertakings that anyone has ever done in film, to have a story that culminates up where you have like 10 years of full-length feature films to kind of support everything that happens in this one. So you could put 800 characters in it and we all know who they are. This is similar in that it relies on not 10 years worth of films, but like kind of like 19 years worth of lore. So like you go back to like the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man from 2002, and all of that shit, like if you've seen all 5 of those movies, that makes it so this works so well, because you don't have to, I mean, I keep saying it over and over, but you don't have to build these characters up and give them stories. All you had to do was give them a reason to be here, and their backstories already exist in other films. And that's so fucking cool to me. And it's so smart, because that's how you do the multi-purpose fan service. You get the fan service, but then you also have the convenience of being able to bring in characters that you don't have to explain their whole backstory. Like we already saw Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man backstory in the first 3 movies with him. And I just love how they did that. All right, so now I'm gonna get into some of the fanboy stuff here. When I mentioned earlier that I don't know if you can really enjoy it as much if you haven't seen the other 5 films, part of the reason I say that is because some of this film's best moments rely on those things. So like you can still enjoy these scenes for what they are, but again, you're not going to appreciate them quite the same. And I think the best example of this, and it is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, is when Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man saves Tom Holland's MJ from falling off the Statue of Liberty. And they did the reason you can still enjoy it without having seen the Garfield version is they set it up a little bit here anyway. They have him mention him failing to save Gwen Stacy earlier in the film. So when you see him successfully save another Spider-Man's girl, you can make that connection. But like when you experience that moment in the Garfield film, you also notice that they even kind of framed it the same. Like it's visually similar. So when he makes that move that he was not successful in making in his films, when he successfully does it in this one, it's like, oh wow, like you really get the weight of that, and you see him crying, and it's like, or tearing up or whatever, and the whole idea of I was able to do for this Peter what I couldn't do for myself. I was able to do for this MJ what I couldn't do for my Gwen. Like that was such a great moment, and you can get it because they set it up, but it's a little bit different than when you experienced it in that film. So one of the best moments, and it relies heavily on that. Also, a lot of the banter between the Spider-Men is kind of reliant on having seen those films as well. Like there's an interesting moment where they're kind of like building up the Andrew Garfield version. It's so fucking meta because it's like people look at those movies, those 2 as like the worst ones of the bunch, and they are. But I always thought Garfield was a great Spider-Man, like a great Peter Parker, and him kind of like leaning into that perception of being like the least of the 3, I thought was really funny. And then you add it, because that's again something, if you don't know the history, you don't know how meta that is, that he's kind of like making fun of how his movies just weren't that good. And then you got Tobey Maguire coming in, building him up like, you're amazing. And that, it's a simultaneous, like, okay, it's one Spider-Man cutely building up another Spider-Man, which you will get if you haven't seen the other ones. And then it also has the added context of his movies were called The Amazing Spider-Man, whereas the others weren't. So like, you get stuff like that that's pretty cool that you can get if you don't see it, you haven't seen it, but it's extra special if you have. There's a really cool shot of all the Spider-Men like jumping and swinging at the same time and landing at the same time. That was really cool. Speaking of which, like lots of really good. I had a really good crowd. Crowds that cheered at the appropriate times, and I'm gonna get to that in a moment after I talk about a couple of these emotional scenes that they did really well as well. Aunt May's death was done really well. I thought they dragged it out. I think to an appropriate degree to kind of like maximize the emotional impact to where, you know, like I think it was kind of smart to make you feel like she was safe, because I was kind of sitting there like, could she really survive this? No, maybe not. And I think that worked really well. And it sucks because I'm sitting there watching it like, man, how many people is he gonna have to watch die? Like, man. And then this time you look at it like, this is really his fault. So because he made that choice. I mean, she asked him to make the choice, but you know, he made the choice that ultimately resulted in what happened. I really like that after that, when the other Peters tell him to go, you know, ask MJ, like, is there anywhere he might be where we could find him, you know, a place that's special to him, and they go there, and then all three of them are hugging. I thought that was a really great scene, and I felt like, and I like that they held it particularly long, because that's how I feel like that's how it would be in real life. Like if these people were real and they had these kinds of experiences, it wouldn't just be a, hey, let's all hug. It would be like this long thing where they probably all cried together, and that felt real to me. Having to say goodbye at the end, I thought was a good emotional sequence as well. They did a great job with, I like them having Peter and Ned sadly doing their handshake that they do. I thought that was nice. They nailed the emotional moments here. I'm sure there's more, but like I said, I wasn't able to take notes, so I'm kind of just going off the top of my head. Well, the notes that I put down off the top of my head. So, getting into some of the cameo, no, I can't even call them cameos. Some of a lot of the fan service that worked. The biggest pop, I think, in my theater. Well, it wasn't the biggest pop, but it was pretty big. Was the reveal of Matt Murdock, and that was probably my favorite moment because I already knew the villains, I already knew the Spider-Man people were gonna be there, but I wasn't 100% on Charlie Cox. Like I was like 80% sure maybe that he was gonna be in it. I hadn't actually seen any actual like grainy stills of Charlie Cox on the set, but I've said that of those Netflix, those Marvel Netflix shows, that not only is Daredevil the best one, which is, that compliment is about to pale in comparison to the one I'm about to make, but that one of the best castings they've ever done was Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio. And I always said if they want to bring either of those characters into the MCU, they need to bring those two actors back, because that was like Hugh Jackman as Wolverine level kind of casting. And man, seeing Charlie Cox back was absolutely incredible. I was so happy to see that. It was fucking awesome. Seeing you know, Lizard, Sandman, even Electro, it was cool seeing Jamie Foxx. He had some great moments, but Doc Ock and Green Goblin, great to see them back. I feel like they probably did some CG on Alfred Molina, because he almost looks younger now than he looked in Spider-Man 2. But man, what can you say about Willem Dafoe, man? Like, oh my God, he was so fucking good, man. Just his ability to shift between Norman Osborn and Green Goblin was so good. And then they allowed him to really go full Willem Dafoe. Like the last thing I saw Willem Dafoe in was The Lighthouse, and that was like mind blowing to me. Watch my video on The Lighthouse. It's an incredible fucking movie, and he's incredible in it. And I love how, again, multi-purposing things, right? You have him smash the Green Goblin helmet at the beginning of the film, and you look at that as kind of like a fairly inconsequential moment. But then as the film progresses, I'm realizing this is allowing him to do a whole lot of face work, like not having to wear that helmet, watching visually what happened, what he does with his face when he's doing Goblin versus when he's doing Osborn is just incredibly great work, like incredibly great acting. And then again, multi-purposing, crushing that helmet allowed them to do like several steps in what ultimately ended up being him looking more like the classic Green Goblin from the comic. Like he still had that armor on, But when he was Norman Osborn, they kind of, you know, wrapped him up in these rags or whatever, and he's at, you know, he's getting you know, fed by Aunt May, and he's, you know, huddled up, like, you know, he's cold, and he's got on these, you know, sweaters and all this kind of shit, right? And over his Green Goblin armor. And then throughout the course of the film, the shit just gets torn up, and he's got a hood on. It's like, holy fuck, it looks like the actual Green Goblin from the comic. You still get to see his facial work and stuff like that. And what seemed like a small, inconsequential move early on turns out to be a multi-purposed, like, hey, we're actually doing this to give you a more authentic looking Green Goblin and allow Willem Dafoe to do what he does best. And it was just a brilliant decision. And Willem Dafoe, fuck, he brought his A game, man. Like I said, Andrew Garfield was great. I was really happy to see him. That might have been the biggest pop at my theater, was Andrew Garfield coming back. That was awesome. Toby looked old, man. But seeing Toby back was great. I loved every reference to the original ones. So much to love here. But there are some flaws here. You know, it moved at a very breakneck speed, which I thought at first was them just, like, it felt for, I'd say maybe like the first, I don't know, maybe like half hour. I was wondering if this was actually going to be a bad movie that's just going to be like, hey, here's fan service, fan service, fan service, fan service. And because it felt very herky-jerky, like we're just going to shoot fan servicey type shit at you and not give you too much to go on. What they ended up building ended up being great. But for a little bit at the beginning, I was a little bit concerned with how sloppy it almost felt. And then there was like a couple like action sequences where I'm always I don't want to say picky, but when I can't really tell what's happening in an action sequence, I feel like you have ultimately failed as a director. And there were a couple of moments where it was kind of like, I can't really tell what's going on here. So minor quibbles there, but all in all, man, I'm not going to try to rank this right now. It's still too fresh in my head. I don't want to be, I don't want to experience too much recency bias here, but man, they knocked it out of the park with this one, man. So much cool shit in it. Great emotional moments. You know, like I said, the multi-purposing of things that work within the film, but then also work on a larger scale or on a more I don't know, I guess like literal to what they want to do in the future. Like the idea of Green Goblin being normal looking, but more like the comic, making Peter look more like the comic, a more classic suit that just looks a little vibrant. Being able to reset, so now you can kind of like integrate things that maybe people missed in this iteration of Spider-Man that was present in the other ones. They can now do whatever they want. Like it was some really brilliant decision making here. So, and a 10 out of 10 as far as having a fun time at the movie. So definitely check it out. If there's things that you want to discuss that I forgot about, pop it in the comments and we'll talk about it. And I'll see you guys on Wednesday for the Hawkeye finale. And then I'm probably going to be signing off from Marvel for some time until this channel builds up a little bit more steam and people start checking out the Marvel content a little bit more. So until next week with the Hawkeye finale, peace.